Hello, everybody. I see the attendees are streaming in. We can give about 3 more minutes for everyone to just stream in because I'm seeing it's happening really fast. Then we can get started at 2:05. Feel welcome, everybody. Okay. So it is now 2:05. Thank you very much for making time to join us today. We'd like to get started. And so the reason the Kenya Green Building Society today has decided to partner with the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance is because this session will be able to address the growing interest and momentum amongst our members and the general public towards to participate to address the growing momentum and interest towards the carbon markets, the international carbon markets, and to also discuss the followings of COP26 in Glasgow, and that is why we have partnered with Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. My name is Rachel Mudeu. I have my colleague on the line, Louis Karaoke, both from Kenya Green Building Society, and we definitely have our co-presenter today on the line, who is Bianca Gishangi from Eastern Africa, the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. So before I introduce her, I'll just take you briefly through who we are as KGPS, what we do, and then we'll just dive into the program. So I'm just going to start my slideshow. So today's speakers are as shown on the screen, and we are definitely happy to also comment that it is during the World Green Building Week. So today is the 4th day of the week, and we're very happy to be doing this session with everyone who's joined in. So who is KGPS and what do we do? So Kenya Green Building Society is a non-profit member-based organization, and the reason it was established is to lead the transformation of Kenya's construction industry towards environmentally sustainable buildings that promote a healthy and efficient built environment. So we are a member of the World Green Building Council as the Kenyan representatives, and the World Green Building Council has become a network that is the world's strongest local, regional, and global action network for the built environment. The mission we have is to advocate, educate, and certify green buildings in Kenya in order to achieve an environmentally, socially, and economically progressive built environment. And we definitely understand that we do all these initiatives and activities under the 3 main umbrellas of the World Green Building Council, which is climate action, resource circularity, and health and well-being. As we give back to the environment, it also gives back to us for healthy well-being. So our activities are from below. We do advocacy, we do education, we do certification, innovation, and collaboration. And the outputs are in the form of the programs that we deliver and run as a society, which include draft policies that incorporate sustainable development for the Kenyan market, draft standards again on the sustainability in the built environment for the Kenyan market, training for participants, publishing of newsletters, tools and products such as the Jenga Green Library, I'm sure most of you have come across, and many other tools and products that are going to assist in the sustainable development of the built environment. And what we do much more, but I'm not going to go through all of it. But our hoped outcome, the outcome we definitely hope to achieve is to ensure that these policies are definitely promoting the sustainable development and that these policies that are promoting the sustainable development are adopted and the standards are set, and we achieve certification for green buildings, as well as have strategic partners who engage in KGPS activities, participants who understand green building concepts and tools, participants who become green building accredited professionals, KGPS products that are used in the construction value chain, engagement with the strategic partners become formalized. And to just go back to the KGPS products that are definitely going to need to be used in the value chain, just to tie it back to the reason why we are having our event today, is we do have a tool that is a voluntary carbon portal, and we are going to understand first what the carbon market is from the leading the leading body in the Eastern Africa region that deals with carbon markets and climate finance. And with no further ado, I am going to introduce our presenter, who, again, I will say her name is Bianca Gishangi, and she is, so I'll just read a quick bio about her. So Bianca is the coordinator for the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. She is responsible for the management of activities and the strategic development of the Alliance. She has experience on matters relating to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and provides technical support in this area to Alliance members. Her experience extends to carbon pricing, climate change negotiations, stakeholder and partner engagement, monitoring, reporting and verification, that is MRP, of carbon market projects, and facilitating climate finance. So without further ado, Bianca, please feel free to carry on with the session. And one word to the audience, feel free to raise any questions you may have in the chat box, any area within the carbon market or climate finance area that you may need touched on by our main presenter, so that she may have the
Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me. I think the screen might have frozen a little bit. Can you hear me? Sorry, can I just get a confirmation that you can hear me?
perfectly now.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, Rachel. And today I'll be taking you through an introduction to carbon markets. It's a heavy topic, but I'll try and be as concise as possible as we don't have too much time. Just as Rachel has mentioned, I'll give you a very brief background on the Alliance, which she mentioned earlier, and the membership comprises of Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Sudan. So it's very much a country-driven type of alliance, and all our activities are based on the requests that come from these different countries, who normally have a focal point, which is a representative from one of the relevant government ministries dealing with carbon markets. And we're hosted by the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center in Kampala. And basically, we're based at the East African Development Bank and supported quite a bit by the German Ministry of Economic Development and Climate Action, as well as the SIACA initiative under the UNFCCC. So the UNFCCC, in simple English, is just the UN of climate change, and you're probably familiar with it. And our main aim is just to make sure the countries participate in carbon market activities long term. And we do a lot of capacity building in these particular areas. We support negotiators to attend the COPs and to actually negotiate, as well as doing a lot of regional exchange, sharing of best practice and lesson learned with everything to do with carbon pricing. So we're very much from a policy side, but I do have experience on a project developer side as well. So I'll be taking you through the different aspects where green building practitioners can come in. So just to start off very quickly, you've had me mention carbon pricing. And literally, we know that there's a lot of emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and the cost of this is usually not factored into the economic activities associated with this, and that's known as an externality. So you can have a factory creating products, but then the pollution that goes into the air, and it's the public that suffers the most from this. That cost is usually not factored into the product. So carbon pricing is a way to help with lowering emissions, where you put a price on every ton of CO2 equivalent emitted, and the emitter is the one who actually pays for it. So it's a polluter pay principle here. And carbon pricing takes different formats. And today we'll talk about the quantity-based one, carbon markets. There's also carbon taxes, but that's another story for another day. Today we'll be focusing on carbon markets. And carbon markets really, they allow for trading of emission allowances. Sorry, just 1 second, I need to move this panel screen because it's taking up my screen. Right, so as I was saying, so carbon markets allow for trading of emission allowances and offsets to help countries and corporates to limit their greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll explain what allowances and offsets are. So private sector actors, they find carbon markets quite efficient and a cost-effective way of reducing emissions as they try to switch to, the best available technologies, which sometimes, actually many times, is quite expensive. So then this brings us to what we call emissions trading systems. This is where the carbon market takes place, and it operates on a principle known as cap and trade. So you have a region where a particular government jurisdiction, where the government will impose a limit on the total emissions that the different sectors and industries can emit, and this generally will form the cap. And this is why we say quantity-based, because there's a limit on the emissions. So the cap will define the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that can be emitted from these different industries in the various sectors in this emissions trading scheme. So the regulated companies now will be allocated allowances, which is basically a permit for every ton of CO2 equivalent that they release. And what will happen? So if we look at the diagram, we're taking an example where we have two industries, but industry B is better at putting in measures to lower their emissions, right? So they end up actually emitting less than what they're allowed, and then they end up having allowances which they don't use. Then you come to industry A, which is probably a lot bigger. They're trying to reduce their emissions, but they can't reduce as much as, say, company B. So they get to a point, but it's still over the limit that has been allowed by the government. So what happens is these allowances that company B hasn't used become is now a commodity that can be bought by company A so that they can compensate for exceeding through the allowances. So there you see a company B is providing a supply of the allowance, and then company A is buying it, and then that way they still maintain the limits that have been set by the government. And there are different kinds of ETSs in the world. So there's one in the EU, there's one in China, Korea, in certain states in North America, such as Quebec in Canada, as well as in California. So the EU ETS is the oldest one. It was the largest one for a very long time, but China launched theirs last year, so it's going to be the larger one. Now, so that's where the carbon trading happens. If you just look at this diagram, at the top right, you'll see something there written offset credits. So I'll get to that. But ideally, that's how you have the demand and supply from the allowances that is now causing the carbon trading to happen. And ETSs generally, they can actually generate money for the governments, and they can channel this to other climate initiatives. And they can also link to other carbon markets to become an even bigger and more efficient system. So an example would be Quebec, which is actually linked to the California cap and trade system. Now, for you to have an ETS, it's not a simple thing. Yeah, there's certain preconditions for you to have it implemented. You definitely need, one, a sufficient number of entities, so definitely industries that can keep this demand and supply continuously in check. It doesn't help having one-off projects that provide supply for one day and not having people who can't buy this as well. Then you need the available abatement potentials in these certain sectors, so the ability to have technologies to reduce these emissions. You need to have the capacity to monitor, report, and verify the emissions for these companies, and of course the legal mandate and authority to enforce this emissions trading scheme, because it's being set by the government, and this is usually known as a compliance market. So these preconditions are part of the reasons why a lot of developing countries don't have ETSs yet. So if you look at this diagram, this is from the World Bank's State of and Trends of Carbon Pricing. They do one every year. I highly recommend that you take a look at it. It shows you the status of ETSs currently globally. And as you can see, the experience with Africa is more on the carbon taxation side, not really on the ETSs. The ETSs are more in the developed countries, but you have China that actually took a very long time. It piloted for quite a few number of years, about 10 years, before it actually launched as an emission trading scheme. So you can't just have one overnight. There's a lot of piloting that needs to go into it, even if a developing country is interested in this. So a good example of a developing country on the way to an ETS is Mexico, which has been piloting for quite some time. And so now that brings us to offsetting schemes. So if I take you back quickly, if you look at the diagram, you're seeing offsets coming into that carbon market. So you know, in Africa, we don't have an ETS, but how is Africa participating in carbon markets? The answer is through offsetting schemes. So this is basically when companies, governments, you finance projects that are emission reducing, but in a jurisdiction that is outside of the capped area. What do I mean by this? You have the EU ETS, but you can purchase offsets in another jurisdiction, for example, in Africa, in Kenya, from a project that is actually reducing emissions. So, for example, what happens with this particular project is you have a baseline, which would be what are the emissions expected without this project. So, for example, here in Kenya, we're going to put up a coal plant, but then instead you put in a renewable energy project, which is like solar or wind project. And then now what you do is you have the baseline emissions, what you expected without the project, minus what you actually emit with this new project. And you find that you actually avoided emitting emissions into the atmosphere. And this is now what we will quantify as emission reductions. So these emission reductions, which is how much less of the greenhouse gas that enters the atmosphere, that would have been the case in the absence of the project. This project is now delivering emission reductions, and this is what we call, in layman's term, a carbon offset or a carbon credit. But for practitioners, you will call it an emission reduction. The other type of offset is known as an emission removal, which is when the project actually takes out carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. A simple example of this is the way forests, or rather trees, sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. So just in a nutshell, remember there are two kinds of offsets, emission reductions and emission removals. And then for these projects to actually take off, they're actually based on methodologies that are sound and tested and internationally recognized. You can't just sit there and come up with your own calculations or your own project. No, there's usually technical committees in various standards. So you'll find a lot at the UNFCCC, you'll find a lot in the voluntary carbon markets, but these methodologies are really tested and tried by various committees and are internationally recognized. So just the thing with offsets. So now if Africa is providing offsets to other carbon markets globally, there's usually a limit within that carbon market of how much offsets can go into it. Because if you have an oversupply, it can jeopardize the market, and really it beats the purpose of what we're trying to do with lowering emissions. So as green building practitioners, you can approach this from two angles. You can approach it as, I'm a building owner, I want to generate offsets, or I'm a building owner, I want to purchase offsets towards a net zero strategy. And so for net zero, So what do I mean by net zero? This is basically when an organization tries to, or a company reduces their emissions as much as possible. So you're putting in all the measures you can to try and lower your emissions, but then there'll just be a residual amount of emissions which you can't abate. And that residual amount is balanced by what we call high quality permanent removal credits. So basically, you determine your carbon footprint, we put in a strategy and measures as much as possible to try and reduce the emissions of your company. Then whatever is remaining as a very last resort, now you can use offsets to balance it and then get to net zero. So for those in the private sector space, if you're going to do your carbon footprint, you can use the greenhouse gas protocol, which would determine you doing your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 are the direct emissions from just the company operations. Scope 2 is from electricity that's generated and purchased. And scope 3 refers to emissions in the supply chain. So as I've said, this is something a lot of large companies are starting to do. This is how private companies are contributing to the fight against climate change in terms of setting net zero strategies so that their operations can be as low emitting as possible. There's a resource that was done by the World Economic Forum, JLL, on green building principles that goes into detail on this net zero for carbon buildings. So I do urge you to also take a look at that. It's quite a good resource on that. So just a minute. And in case you can't hear me or anything, just let me know and interrupt me. So then now we come to policy side of things, because these markets didn't just, pop out of nowhere. The EU ETS actually came out of something. So when we look at international policy, Rachel mentioned, you're heading into COP27 this year. So the COPs have been around for a long time. And there was a time we had the Kyoto Protocol, which was actually signed at COP3 a long time ago. And the Kyoto Protocol had developed countries, they had binding targets to reduce their emissions. And out of this, there were 3 mechanisms that came out to help with that. One of them was the Clean Development Mechanism, the other was joint implementation, the other was international emissions trading. Now, the Clean Development Mechanism, if you can look at the diagram to the right, was between developed and developing countries. The developed countries would purchase the offsets from the developing country, and then the developing country would benefit through sustainable development. Now, the other 2 schemes were between developed countries. I won't go into them, but just know that the international emissions trading was referring to the EU ETS at the time, because that was the main scheme, the main compliance carbon market that was available. So, of course, the CDM was the largest offsetting scheme. At the time, we're now in a new regime, so we're no longer dealing with that, which now takes me to the Paris Agreement, which was signed at COP21. We are now heading into COP27. So basically, with the Paris Agreement, it's a global agreement where we all try to make sure our emissions don't go beyond 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And this is something that is being catered to by all kinds of stakeholders. Even though it's a government policy, rather it's a government that signed on to this, private sector is also putting in effort to align themselves to this as well. Now, the difference with Paris and Kyoto is that Paris is very bottom up. Your country decides what target it will set. No one forces them into a target. They decide for themselves, and they say how they'll contribute to this. So we have what are called nationally determined contributions, NDCs. So your country, Kenya, has an NDC, right? And with the Paris Agreement, there's a new set of market mechanisms that have come in. And these ones now are under Article 6, and they're supposed to promote sustainable development, but have high environmental integrity, be transparent, contribute to ambition. And this is through cooperative approaches and a mechanism that will replace the CDM. So, of course, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be robust accounting, we need to avoid double counting. But then there's something we know as the voluntary carbon markets, which is probably what you're more familiar with, because this was functioning outside the compliance market, and it was corporates pretty much buying these offsets just for their own purposes internally and carbon neutrality purposes. So a lot of the voluntary carbon market activities that came up, they came up at a time when the CDM, or rather the larger compliance markets, were having difficulty in showing sustainable development or actually capturing it. So these standards started evolving in trying to make sure they actually capture that. And they're very high on quality and the co-benefits that come with it. Now, the thing is, it's very small compared to the compliance market, but because there's so much demand for this type of units nowadays, you're seeing a situation where voluntary carbon markets are scaling up. And now the question is, okay, as a private practitioner, you're probably buying credits from the voluntary carbon market. What does that have to do with Paris? What does that have to do with Article 6? The issue comes in because your country has an NDC, and the activities of voluntary carbon market activities take place in sectors that are in those NDCs. So we're in a situation now where governments have to decide how this relationship with the voluntary carbon markets will work. So very quickly, I'm going to go into voluntary carbon market standards. Now, I cannot stress this enough. If you are going to buy offsets, please do your due diligence. Please make sure the project that you are buying from is coming from a reputable standard. So I've put here 3 standards that are very common in Kenya and in Africa. So that would be the gold standard, Verra, and Plan Vivo. So the American Carbon Registry it's international, but it's mainly used in America. So what really applies here are the first 3, gold standard, Verra, and Plan Vivo. And gold standard is very, very key on capturing sustainable development benefits, SDGs. And where we have Verra, and a lot of the activities were in cook stoves. Then we have Verra, which is from America, but it has projects all over, but mainly in developing countries. And a lot of this is from their follow sector, which is agriculture, forestry, and land use. Plan Vivo also has a high focus on forestry and land use. And Plan Vivo is also quite transparent on the benefits that go to the community. So I reiterate, these standards are at least are quite reputable. They've been around for some time, but they were not governed by any governments. And what we are seeing is that they are trying to be transparent and to tell governments this is what they're doing, because some of them are actually trying to be Article 6 compliant. And because at the end of the day, the government has to report on its Paris Agreement activities on the NDC. So, there's a lot of concern as to how will this relate to these activities. So if you're going to be buying offsets for your net zero strategy, please make sure it's from a reputable standard, because it's actually a process to get these credits. You have to make sure they're real, you have to make sure they're verified, and you have to make sure that they are good quality. So let me stop there for a minute, just to make sure I haven't lost anybody. I hope I'm clear. Are there any questions just to before I move on?
Thank you, Bianca.
Okay.
So let's have Louis just go through the questions that are in the chat, and if we have anyone who actually wants to go ahead and just ask the question live as we go on, please raise your hand and we will definitely notify you to go ahead and ask your question. So we do have a Q&A session for like around five minutes. Yeah, so let's have the questions coming in.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you, Rachel. So far we do not have any questions on the questions tab. I'll just remind our viewers again, as Rachel has said, to ask any questions on the tab as we continue towards the Q&A session.
Sure, no problem. I'll continue. I just normally don't like going through an entire presentation and you lose people. So in case there are any questions, just let me know. But basically what I've tried to do in this first part of the presentation is to show you where they come from, what it is. It's a part of, there's many interlinkages, and you as a practitioner can decide whether you're buying or whether you're generating. So I've explained, if you're buying, use a reputable standard, have your net zero strategy. But now my second part of the presentation will go into what happens if you want to have a project, say through your green buildings. And what I'll do is I'll take us through the scenario in Kenya and then give a case study, and then we can discuss in detail what you think about this. So I will just resume, excuse me, into full screen. Great. All right. So then I'll go into Kenya's carbon market profile. Because you're probably wondering how active have we been, as a country in different sectors in these different types of carbon markets. So at the Alliance, what we do is we've done carbon profiles for all our countries, and Kenya has the most activity in Eastern Africa, actually. And our carbon profiles are based on data from 2020, December 2020. But bear in mind, we're actually updating this right now, so we should be able to update with fresh data by November this 2022. So just in a month or two, we'll have fresher numbers. But this, ideally, just take it as just an indication of how our activity was. bearing in mind that it's probably gone quite a bit higher for the voluntary carbon market activities, but has probably remained around the same for CDM, because CDM has transitioned from Kyoto now into Paris Agreement, and we're doing Article 6. So Kenya has, as I mentioned before, has projects in those other standards that I mentioned. So for gold standard, we had about 38 activities standing alone, and the gold standard could actually be used on CDM projects just to give them that extra value of sustainable development. And as I mentioned before, the dominant sectors were energy efficiency in cook stoves and off-grid solar PV. That's now for the gold standard. But then when we go into Verra, we have the main sectors issuing as agriculture, forestry, and then a little bit of cook stoves. And then we had about like one project with Plan Vivo, which was the Mikoko Pamoja, and all this have different types of issuances done. So when you look at the voluntary carbon markets, you had, close to 26 million credits being issued and being used in these different projects. But then that brings us now, if you recall, that's on the voluntary carbon market side. If you recall, there was the CDM, which I mentioned was actually the largest offsetting scheme and was under the UN. So that was centrally governed by the UNFCCC. And in Kenya, we had about 20 project activities in this area, 169 CPAs. Now, CPAs are called component project activities, which are usually part of a program of activities known as a POA. So POAs came in to help very, very small scale projects that couldn't scale up. So what you do is you have many small projects and put them in a program, and you can keep adding different components to that POA, which really helped a lot of African projects that were not necessarily large in size. So as I mentioned, we had the largest portfolio in Eastern Africa. In Africa, I think we're about third behind South Africa and Egypt. And the earliest registration was in 2008, which was the Mumias Bagas project. Now, this project unfortunately did not reach issuance, but I'll explain what that is. So here you're seeing a majority of the credits that were done under CDM were in cook stoves, water purification, grid-connected electricity generation, a lot of that from geothermal, which is from KenGen, and run-of-the-river hydros. So this is giving you a picture of where the activity has been, but it doesn't mean that moving forward that we can't tap into other sectors. If we can't tap, we can tap into forestry, we can tap into waste, we can tap into transport and green buildings, of course. So just as a showcase activity, now the standards, all the standards, including the CDM, including gold standard, they have registries where these projects are, right? So you can literally Google just go to the registries, Google Kenya, and you will see projects across very many different sectors, and you can always read up on them. And these registries have the project design documents, they have the monitoring reports, they have a lot of information on the projects. So as I mentioned before, when you're doing your due diligence on when you're buying, just make sure that you can get as much information on the project as you can. And so for this showcase, I'll talk about KenGen, which had 6 registered CDM activities. This was in geothermal, hydro, and wind. This is actually a project that I worked on really early on. I used to work in KenGen, so I've worked on all these projects early on in my career. And basically, they've seen issuance over the years, and you've seen a lot of CERs, which are the credits, being issued. And some of them have different crediting periods than others, but it's a situation where the projects have actually gone the entire cycle and have actually been successful in getting the carbon credits. And this is important because a lot of projects get stuck at being registered and don't actually monitor, report, verify, and don't get issued their credits. And it's usually because they don't have an understanding of what the entire cycle is or understand the amount of commitment you have to actually dedicate to having a carbon project. So coming to green buildings, what happens with green buildings is that you would have to find, remember I was talking about methodologies earlier, you have to find a methodology that would be suitable to the project or the green buildings that you're coming up with. So this would be and I know when you're looking at green buildings, you look at different aspects, you know, like low water use, energy efficiency, you know, sustainable materials. So what you do is you look for methodologies in those particular areas. So you can look at the lighting for the building and see if there's a methodology where you can put in efficient, you know, light bulbs and or energy efficiency technologies. The emission that you would avoid by putting in these efficient systems, you can calculate the emission reductions, and those would be your carbon credits. And then if you're issued, you can sell that. So this is a list of all the methodologies that the UNFCCC. So the UNFCCC has a lot of methodologies. There are over 200. So these are just the some of them that are applicable to green buildings. So take, for instance, there's a section there that says whole building, you know, and you look at one of the methodologies and it talks about, oh, energy efficiency and renewable energy measures in new residential buildings, right? So you can design your project around that methodology. You can also design a project using multiple methodologies. And then now create that as a form of generating your carbon credits. So this is overwhelming. If I gave you a list like this, of course, you'd be like, oh, where do I start? All these things. Where we are hosted at the Regional Collaboration Center in Kampala, the RCC, there are teams dedicated to this who can guide you on which methodologies would probably be better suited to the kind of project that you are doing. So that technical capacity actually is there at the Alliance and at the RCCs. If you are very serious about having a project, they can guide you on which are the best methodologies. So very quickly, what is the cycle? If you decide that you're going to make your green building or buildings, say it's probably a large complex or something that would make a lot of credits, what you do is you first come up with your concept idea note, then you develop a design document. Your design document will detail all these measures that you're putting in and all these measures that lower emissions, and then it will show the methodology you're using. And based on the methodology you're using, you can calculate what your potential carbon credits would be. So step 3 is national approval, but that's only usually for the UN type of standards. The voluntary carbon standards don't necessarily need national approval, but they do need stakeholder engagement, and it's good for the government to know what you're doing, so you can talk to the DNA. Then once you have your design document, you need to bring in auditors, right? You need to bring in auditors to go through your development, your project design document, make sure it's aligned with the methodologies, and make sure it meets the criteria to get registered. Once the validators go through this and they authenticate that the design document is sound, you can be registered, and then that's with the different standards that I mentioned before. So now that you're registered, and this is where I was saying a lot of projects have problems. They get registered and they just think, oh, I'll get my credits. No, you have to monitor your project. Now, what will happen is your design document will have a monitoring plan. So ideally, you should have someone in your company, or you can hire somebody to monitor, for example, for a year, 2 years, you can monitor for some time. Then you write up a report based upon this monitoring, and then you bring in auditors again. These auditors are going to verify that your report is in accordance with what you had said in the design document, that you are following the proper monitoring that has been put into place, and that you are, all the equipment you're using is, calibrated, is up to speed. It's a very rigorous process because you have to authenticate that these credits are real. And if your equipment or your monitoring is off, you will lose, you won't get credits for that. So they have ways of lowering what if you were expecting a certain amount, but your monitoring is not as good, there's a chance you'll get lower or not even anything at all. If it's dubious, then they can't verify or authenticate it. So Once you have your monitoring report, you bring in the auditors who are third party. They're not related to you at all. They come and they verify it, and then they give a verification report to the standard. If the standard is happy with it and happy with those reports, then you get issued your credits. Once you have your credits, now you can sell them and obviously see how you give back to the community as well. So bearing in mind that this has costs, so if you look at the cycle in the diagram that I put together, to develop your design document, ideally there's usually documents that can outline how you can develop these documents. But it's a tedious process. You need to sort of have a technical background if you want to do it yourself. So most people will hire a consultant to do that. They'll hire the consultant to develop the design document. They'll tell you the best methodologies. They'll do the calculations, make sure the calculations are correct. And then some countries have a processing fee if you're going for the national system, but in other places, not really. It's just an approval letter that you get. Now, where it becomes expensive is when you need to validate this project design document, because you have to bring in the auditors. They have to fly, and a lot of time the auditors are not based in the country, in the developing country. A lot of them are from developed countries. So sometimes you have to factor in the cost of these auditors coming in. There's usually a site visit, so it can cost like $20,000 depending on what your project is. Then you can register with the standard. It normally has a fee. Monitoring, if you're going to hire a consultant, of course, that's a fee to consider, or you can hire a staff member to do it for you. So that's something you have to factor in. Once you have your monitoring and report, you have to bring in consultants again. That's a cost. And then, of course, depending on the standard, some of them will take away an issuance fee for their own administrative costs from the carbon credits that they issue. So that's just to give you an idea of what it would look like if you actually decided to do your own project. And of course, you nowadays the narrative has changed. It's not just about the emission reduction or the carbon credit. It's about what other co-benefits are involved in generating this carbon project. So the sustainable development has to be factored in. You have to do a lot of stakeholder consultation, and a lot of these different programs are already capturing this in. And you'll hear some terms like what are the social environmental co-benefits, but nowadays you'll find practitioners saying these are core benefits, like in addition to lowering emissions, how the community is benefiting, how it's transparent, how authentic the units are, the quality, like there are very many different ways of measuring it. And that all translates also into the cost, which is why credits in the voluntary market are a lot higher than what was there previously, and will continue to rise because there's a huge demand for it for those now who are buying for their net zero strategies. So you have to decide which side you will be on, whether you are trying to offset, whether you're trying to have a net zero strategy, or whether you want to generate income from this carbon project. And I'll stop there because that's the end of it. And I hope I haven't exceeded the time. Let me see. Right. So over to you, Rachel.
Just say that you've not exceeded the time. You're just right on time. Would you like to do? I want to actually just pass it over to my colleague Louis to go through any questions that we may have that Q&A, and then we can close it out. So again, to the audience, please feel free to also raise your hand. You'll be unmuted by the person on the background, and then you'll also be able to ask your question in person. So over to you, Louis.
Thanks, Rachel. So to go through some of the questions that have come in from the presentation, the first question being, is there a platform in Kenya we can claim carbon points? Just to go ahead and answer this, for people going ahead of the curve, I'll Thank you for going ahead of the curve and asking this question. Actually, there is a portal that you can claim the offsets from, which Rachel will be talking about later after this section of the presentation. Unless there's anything that you'd like to add on this, Bianca, as well.
Yeah, so what happens is they're usually, I mean, there are all these different standards out there, so you can actually look into the projects yourself. But what a lot of people do is they use brokers. So some brokers can get you good buyers, or they can get you, they can get your project to look into. My thing with platforms is just that I think they need to have a lot of information. So just the price and a paragraph on the project will not be enough. You need to know which standard it has been registered through. And then there's also a lot of developments happening, like where you're having, especially for nature-based projects, those are the ones with removals. Some are even going through rating systems to rate how the quality is based on, there are very many different aspects which are very technical you can go into. But ideally, yes, there are many platforms coming up. I'd just say if you're going to use a platform and not go directly to the standard or not use a broker, just make sure the platform is giving you a lot of information. That's just basically what I'd say. Yeah.
Thank you, Bianca. Let me just go to the next question.
Sorry, just to say, like, it's very easy to go to the Gold Standard website, to the Verra website, type in Kenya, and you can have your field day of projects. So you can see how some are issuing, some are not. So I really encourage people to do due diligence on certain projects. And then, of course, it's great if you have the price, but then that's also a negotiating tactic sometimes, especially with large corporates. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully the question has been answered. So let me go to the second one. As a developer, how do I participate in carbon trade through my projects? Thank you.
So when I was going through the cycle, once you actually get your credits, because it's a process to get the credits, this is where also you as a project developer come in, where you can either approach corporates directly, which I know some projects do. Some of these big projects actually target the large, buyers and corporates, the Netflixes and whatnot of other developing countries. So you can approach them, but then what will happen is you'll need to sign an emission reduction purchase agreement. It's known as an ERPA, and this is the contract to actually buy the purchase agreements. So that's also usually a huge task, which is where brokers come in as well. And ideally, I feel like sometimes they charge a bit too much and can actually exploit the developer. So for the developer, I'd say maybe in-house, if you can find a way of knowing how you want to negotiate and to make sure that the price that is being put forward captures you as the developer. You're able to communicate. I'm reducing emissions by this much, but look, I'm also giving back to the community in this. The air quality in this will be good. Like, there are so many benefits around the society, around the environment that you've also captured in that, and then it will help you with your negotiating power. So when I used to work in when I used to work at KenGen, the ERPAs were between KenGen and the World Bank. So so when it's big corporates, it's very easy to go corporate to corporate. But when you're a smaller developer, it might be a lot harder to get a buyer, but you can still target corporates in developed countries and look for corporates that have net zero strategies or climate change strategies, and that are open to this sort of projects. So you can do it yourself. If it's too much, sometimes you can get consultants who actually help you develop the project, and they can help you with selling. So it's part of the package you can have with a consultant. So they can help you register your project, get it verified, get you the credits, and they can also help you with selling. So I do know of some consultants who do that. They can help you sell your credits, because it's very difficult doing it by yourself. So you can either use consultants, or you can use a broker, or if you're a larger corporation, then it's easier to just have a team that does that, that's dedicated to that. I hope that answers it.
Okay, I think it does. Thank you again. So let me just move on to the third question. From a community level, assuming you are running a community tree planting initiative, and with the understanding of how technical this carbon credit space is for the local level, what is your advice on how to generate income from the carbon credits?
Okay, so I think it comes down to the interested buyer, or rather the private sector developer that will eventually want to buy these credits. So what I'm seeing, especially with small community projects, land restoration type of projects, it will usually be, they'll normally come together to make it a bit more, to make it a bit bigger, a bit more scalable. But at the same time, they still have that question of like, how will I benefit from these projects? So it's actually the financial model of the private sector developer that is financing this project that needs to capture in the community benefits from the beginning, right? So the problem would be like, a lot of times you have this private developer, they come in, they put in a project, the credits are issued, and then everything just goes back to the private sector person that invested. But now you're seeing a situation where if someone is coming with a proposal of, okay, you have these trees and we can buy it, they need to be able to explain to you their model that, okay, they'll put in resources to start the project, because it is a project that needs investment. So the private sector normally puts in the money, and because of doing that, they need to recover costs. They usually like to get the credits, some of the credits as well. But you, as the person who is on the ground monitoring and everything, you have to be sure from the very beginning that part of those credits are going to you. So what's happening is that whoever you're getting into partnership with, who will be buying your credits and who is financing the actual project to get off the ground, because sometimes you could, like what I've seen with small scale projects is that they get grant financing to like kick them off, right? But eventually there needs to be a model that clearly shows the benefits sharing. That ERPA, that purchase agreement needs to be very clear from the beginning, the percentage that will go back to the community, what they will benefit from it. Because it's a very, like, understanding the carbon side is very technical, but if you can explain that with the benefits, you know, in the project itself, you know, it will have all these benefits for the community. It will create jobs, it will, you know, bring water, it will do all these different things, plus the money from the credits. And now the thing is, with the credits, there's different models that are coming in now. So you're having situations where the private developer will be like, okay, fine, you can have 50% of the credits and I'll have 50% of the credits, but I'll probably have them in the first couple of years because I'm taking the most risk in putting up the project. And then you can have the credits afterwards. But as a farmer, you're like, I need the benefits now. So you're seeing situations where you can forward sell your credits, but you see the prices of credits is also going up. So you don't want to forward sell everything now. So there's different kinds of models coming up. And I would just say, if you're a smallholder farmer, some of these projects, like just look at the case studies that have been there before, like Plan Vivo. Some of the projects I've seen, I think 60% goes back to the community, and they're very transparent about it from the beginning. And then they also use the project itself or those contracts. So if you have an ERPA that someone is going to buy your carbon credits, sometimes they can even use that to get a loan. You know, they can use it because it's something that represents real money. So it acts as security for them to even access more climate finance. So all these methods are being communicated better to the communities. That's what I'm seeing from my perspective. So if someone is coming to you and you're a smallholder farmer, please ask them all the hard questions. Like, make sure it's very clear from the get-go how the community is benefiting. And then also something I would say is just to be aware that policy is going to come in eventually, right? There's a lot in the Paris Agreement that is affecting all of this that will make countries need to put in policy in the form of regulations, guidelines, and an act. So even as a country, there will need to be an understanding of how community interacts with this sort of activities, and what carbon rights, whether it's a government, whether it's a communities, whether it's a private developer, all this will become a bit clearer. For now, it's just operating the way it normally has been, but we all know that for Kenyans and for African countries, community benefits sharing is very central. So I can definitely say it's becoming the center part of the model for even the investors coming in to put money into this sort of projects. So even as a corporate, like green buildings, you want to do all this, if you're coming with your money, please have the beneficiary in mind, which I think is maybe your tenants or the community or whoever it is. Just always make sure that they're factored in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So the last two questions are more of requests, so I'll sum them both up. The first request being if a list of approved brokers and partners can be shared. So the list of brokers or partners who can that can be shared so that we can engage when getting going with the claiming process. Second request being sharing the presentation of today's presentation with the attendees. Oh, and yes, sorry, just there's one more final question that has come in. How small is too small? Can a carbon credit be an issue for a house?
I think you can have even micro projects. The problem is going through the entire cycle, because the entire cycle has different costs. So it might not make sense, but you can do it for your house, definitely. It's very, but you can't register your one house as a project. Bearing in the cost, you'll probably end up spending more on developing the project than what you actually get in terms of your emission reductions. So you can definitely do it, but it's probably not worth it scale-wise. And that's why also in the list of methodologies I gave you, like some of those methodologies are for households, but it will literally be usually like a group, like an estate or like a community or something like that. For your own personal use, yeah, you can definitely calculate your own carbon footprint, and then you can see if you want to be carbon neutral and purchase just out of your own initiative. That's definitely doable. But even for like companies and projects that are calculating their carbon footprint, it's always recommended that you get someone who's actually trained in that. And it's also recommended to still have somebody verify that this is your actual footprint, because people do a lot of weird things and then they claim that they claim a lot of strange things as well. So there's a lot of transparency now that's going on. Use actual people who are certified, use verifiers. In terms of the brokers partners, I don't have a list for brokers. We at the RCC, we do have a list for consultants, but it has changed quite a bit because we used to deal with the CDM market, and now I think there's a lot more new entrants. So it's being updated, but in terms of the validators and the verifiers, those are now the auditors who confirm that your projects are authentic and that your reports are authentic. The UN used to have a list. They have a full list of auditors who you can use, and some of them act as project developers. Yeah, so like in Kenya, you can have, I mean, like Climate Care, Bureau Veritas, some of these companies can actually develop your project, and they can help you with developing your project, getting it registered. They'll hire the validators, and then they'll help you with selling as well. So I'd say check that UN list as well. The consultant list is being updated. I know I looked at it the other day and I'm like, it really needs to be updated, but I'll share it as soon as I can, because what happened is when CDM went down, some of these companies stopped doing all this, and now but now that things are kicking back and Article 6, so the other thing, Article 6 got its decision at the last COP, so now there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of interest. I can definitely put it out there. I think South Polar in Kenya nowadays, I think there's Eco Securities, there's there are quite a few different companies out there, but in terms of compiling our list, I don't want to give you what we have right now. It needs to be updated. I had a look at it the other day. But I hope I've answered all the questions. But I was saying that for the person who wants to just do their house, I just suggest you learn how to do your own carbon footprint, and then you can put in measures to lower it as much as possible. Then whatever is remaining, that's now when you can buy offsets out of your own initiative. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Bianca. And with that, all of the questions have been answered. We don't have any other questions, so I'll hand it back over to Rachel.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, it's the control panel that's getting things twisted. But yeah, I was saying thank you so much, Louis. Thank you very, very much, Bianca, and the Alliance as a whole for having time to just answer these questions and engage the curiosity that's definitely there within our member base and within our contact list that is revolving around the climate finance and carbon market as a whole. And just to open my presentation as I'm closing up, maybe Louis make free presenter, but as you heard, Bianca is very open and will be sharing her presentation. If you'd like to just go through all the standards and all the methodologies, for regarding building, and just learn how to know the process and see whether you want to like build a net zero house that can actually eventually become credits in future. So let me see. Am I sharing my screen already? Not yet. You can only just see me here. People can see my screen. Okay, good. So this part, let me just have it from current slide. So one of the brokers, like what KGPS has done in that broker side of things is setting up a portal where we definitely invite you to just go and have a look. Time is not on our side right now, but we'll definitely send the link to the voluntary carbon offsets portal that has been done in partnership with Patch. So ideally, KGPS doesn't verify the credits. These are credits that have already been verified, and Bianca definitely insisted that at this time and this day and age, these current times, we need to make sure and ensure that we are buying credits that are verified by the actual existing standard. So as you go to the website, I'm not going to do like a demonstration of the website. What we'll do is I will definitely just share the links and you can have your own look at the portal. So what you do is ensure that you read about each and every project so that you know you're not just buying a number of tons for this number of money, this amount of money, where in the real sense you're actually just not doing something that's verified. So the links that we are talking about are, well, I've actually updated some of this, but we'll definitely share the KGPS contact list, the website, the carbon offsets link, do I have a cursor? Yes, the website, the carbon offsets portal link, our email that you can reach us for any queries about today's webinar, and the number, that's the KGPS number. And on the East African Alliance, East Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance side, we definitely have their website, and this is somewhere I wanted to just point out. Sorry, that's on the last slide. They have one very important tab on their website, that's resources. So I couldn't just share the tab because I need everyone to go interact with the website, learn about what Article 6 is saying, in addition to the presentation that Bianca has given us, go into detail in all the trainings they also have on the website, because it's very prudent to actually mention what Bianca had discussed with me earlier, that it's this is a technical topic, and if you want to actually register a project, then you definitely need to know what you're doing, get the facts right, and I can assure you that you'll get the guiding details on their website. The RCC Kampala that she'd also mentioned, you will definitely link that up, and some of the other useful resources in terms of the voluntary carbon standards, you'll get their websites in these links. So I'll definitely share these links in the post-webinar email that will be coming tomorrow to each and every one of you attendees that attended this webinar. So without further ado, because our time has exceeded by a few minutes, we definitely say thank you so much. And yes, just have a lovely afternoon, stroke evening or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And we hope to hear from you. If you need to ask any further questions, you will have our contacts, and the Alliance is ready to help once you need to know your next steps in terms of taking your climate market stroke, carbon market stroke climate finance journey further. So thank you so much, and till next time. Bye.